Here we are on Bradley's Lake. We've come down yesterday just to have a bit of a social session and like meet up, because we don't get a chance to meet each other that often. I'm down here with Jamie Smith, John Elmer, Dave Benton and Peter Bond. So we're just going to go through a few things on what we're actually doing on the lake to catch some fish. When we turned up, we were seeing a few fish like quite a long way out, you know, sort of like 160 yards out. There's not really much chance of getting close to them really. So what I decided was to I tried with the boilies. I couldn't get them out far enough, so I decided to have a go with a sweet corn stringer. Because the sweet corn stringer, it's like I've had good results on it before, where like down at Sandhurst Lake, where I've had my PB common on it last winter. Purely because I was seeing fish further than you can cast, further than what you can get bait out to, and I mean, you can't cast there with a bag because our bag restrictions your casting. Again, it's sort of like just a small mouthful of bait, just enough for a bite, and I think it's a little bit better. Well, I think it's quite a lot better than a single hook bait, to be fair. I think like single hook baits get seen a lot, and sweet corn stringers certainly don't. I think like it's like really good for chucking at fish, because it's like just that little bit visual. They come across it, just a small mouthful of bait, and before you know it, you're into a fish. The sweet corn stringer rig is like quite a lot of fish that I've caught on it, and I'll have a show you how I go about making the rig. It's quite simple, to be fair. I like to be able to make simple rigs. I can't see the point getting too complicated. Puts fish on the bank, and you can tie up and change hooks for it reasonably quickly, which is important, you know, I mean, that's as much as important as what your rig is, like, to make sure that your hook's sharp. So like to be able to tie them quickly, it just takes out that hassle of when you're looking at your rig and you think, oh, that's blunt, you know, like I get a bit of a sharpen or whatever. Like, it's just as easy to change over to a new rig as what it is to sharpen the hook. So you know, like I try to keep them like brand new all the time, you know, so like to be able to tie them quite quickly is quite important. For this rig, I tend to use Suffolk sheepskin in 25-pound brown. To be honest, I pretty much use this for most of my rigs. Like, it's reliable, it don't tangle. I mean, if you know, some people cut down to the 15, you know, for like more suppler rigs, but I found that you tend to get a little bit more tangles with suppler rigs, and this does the job for me. Like, you know, I think that if you're using something semi-balanced, you know, so that it sinks slowly, you tend to get that push away effect with this. Like, whereas if you have something too supple, it'll land too near your lead. I strip off a little bit of the coating to begin with, just about 4 inches, which what I'm intending to end up with is about about an inch or so between the stiff bit and the bottom of the hook. I don't want that too big, because that gives it too much movement, you know, like it gives the hook enough movement to hook the fish, and that's all I want. I want it to be able to sort of push away from the lead and not be too tight, like looking a little bit naff. The hook I like to use for this rig is a quarter size 8 wide gape. I've used these hooks ever since the very first come out, and I've never had a problem with them. They're ultra sharp and they seem to stick in there well. Like, I've used the other sizes, but I find the 8 to be the most reliable size for the sort of fishing that I do. Sometimes, like, I go up to a size 6 if I'm fishing somewhere ridiculously weedy. But to be fair, I mean, even on weedy waters, I've done all right with these hooks, and they've been strong enough to get the fish in, even big fish. Like, I started using them when I was fishing. I used to use quite a lot of anti-eject hooks, like longer shanked hooks and that. And on one particular lake that I was fishing a while ago, they banned the hooks while we was fishing on there, and I had to come up with something different, like, you know, and I decided, instead of using like an anti-eject type rig, trying to trick them in that way, but trying to scale down and trying to trick them in a cute kind of way, and my catch rate doubled just by doing that. And I'm certain, like, if you can sort of cut down and, you know, finesse your tackle as much as what you can do, you tend to catch more fish, like, you know, just looking a little bit less blatant. I mean, if you can see it in the margins, like a dirty, great big shiny hook, then there's no, you know, there's a good shout that the fish can see it too. I start off by doing a little loop in the end just for the end of your eye, you know, which is basic standard procedure. But so that now's cut down to around about 2 inches long, and then I'll cut it a little bit over length, because, like, you know, you can't put it back on again once you've cut it. And then I'll thread all that through the back side of the hook, just to get the right air length. Like, I'm only using 12mm pop-ups at the minute. Well, I'm going to use a 12mm yellow pop-up with my sweet corn stringer, because that's the same rig what I used before. Get the length of your hair right, you know, sort of so that it's not too long. I find with pop-ups, like, you know, you're better off fishing sort of like reasonably short hairs rather than long ones, although I do prefer longer ones for bottom baits. Then I whip up the shank of the hook with the rest, like keeping an eye on where the stiff is, making sure that I've gone round enough times. I've gone round 5 times now, and then I pass that back through the back side of the hook and pull it down, making sure that it don't twist round on itself. And that leaves like just a little bit of supple, just enough so that hook sort of behaves more naturally than it would do if it was stiff. I'll trim off this excess here as well. Leaving everything nice and neat and tidy. I get the length about right. I don't want it much more than sort of 7-8 inches long. I strip a bit off the other side, because I want to have a bit of movement on that side as well. And I do the same sort of loop knot, but like if I left the coating on, I can't get the knot as tight. So I tend to pull the coating off so that I can get it nice and tight, just to make sure that it don't slip at all. It's quite simple, and like all I have to do now is pass it through the ring, pass the hook through it, and then I can have them all in my rig board without having loads of ring swivels in there. You know, so again, it cuts down on the cost of like being prepared, basically. The last component I use is a little bit of shrink tube, around about 10mm long. I use this to hold the air in place and to help the hook turn. I found that, you know, you definitely get like the hook to turn a little bit better than without the shrink tube on, and something that I've always used, especially with pop-ups. Like, you know, sometimes you can get away with it with bottom baits, but with pop-ups I've got to use some sort of shrink tube in. Only put a little bit on. Like I say, you can definitely use too much of this stuff, but just enough, like so that you've got a little bit over the back side of the hook, and as well, you know, sort of holding the air in place so that it's not sort of sitting making the hook turn round. As I shrink it down, I shrink it first so that it shrinks, and then I'll pull it into the direction that I want it. I sort of want it to go like a 45-degree angle along, and then I'll steam the hook link as well, because the coating tends to be a little bit curved, and if you steam it, you'll see that it sort of stays more straight. But as you can see, it's sort of like a 45-degree angle, just pointing in towards the hook. This helps the hook to turn and helps it grab hold pretty easy once it gets into the carp's mouth. I did find, like, once I was using it, and I sort of like gradually getting a little bit longer and longer with the tubing, and I found that my catch rate went down. And when I see one of my articles that I'd done before and like I'd only used a little bit, I tied up some more and, like, you know, used the smaller pieces of shrink tube and then started catching again, like, you know. So I think the length of that is quite critical. And that's the finished rig, just there. I using a little yellow pop-up, which obviously goes really well with sweet corn. Something that I've got quite a lot of faith in. These are super buoyant, these little yellow pop-ups. I'll put them on first, knowing that it's going to be ridiculously buoyant. What I tend to do is put a split shot on that I want to use, and then I'll trim the pop-up down, which is what I've always done, to be fair. I think that just makes it just that little bit more finesse, so that, you know, you got it ultra critically balanced. You just take tiniest little slivers off, so you can have it really slowly sinking. And I think, like, then when you know, when you're getting that, I think you're just getting a little bit better presentation. And if you use a standard bottom bait, everything just falls to the floor, like right at the side of the lead. And like, certainly using a wafter type of bait, it certainly ups your chances of a take. I put it on the air and then put my little split shot, my little stop on there, just so that it's nice and tight on the back shank of the hook. Because I don't, like I said earlier, I don't like my hairs too long. You just want it so that it's just right, just so you've got just the tiniest little gap, just so that the air can still move. And then I'll get a number 4 split shot. I mean, my rigs pretty much stay the same most of the time. The only times when I change them is when I've got something that makes it awkward for me to fish the rigs that I fish. You know, so like I said about going up sizes of hooks because of the weed and that. I try and keep everything as small as I can do. I do find that this rig works better with a size 8 than a size 6, to be fair. But that's the finished rig, and then what I'll do now is just trim that pop-up down so that it sinks really slowly. So there it is now, all shaved down and looking nice and small. This now slowly sinks. I've tried it in the margins, and I'll show you it in a sec. So that it just slowly sinks, behaving more like my free offerings, and obviously, you know, sort of being able to trick the carp up. We'll start off by showing you how to do this sweet corn stringers. You're going to need a stringer needle and some PVA. Now, the PVA that I use, I tend to use the solid PVA because you've got a little bit longer melting time, and because, like, obviously sweet corn's in like a water base, you've got to try and dry it out to try and get your baits out there without the stringer melting. Now, PVA string melts a little bit quicker than this does, and I found this to be the best to use for using a sweet corn stringer. As well, it tends to keep the sweet corn, the individual grains, like, apart, so you can get like a nice presentation once you get it out onto the bottom. You start off by getting some sweet corn. Any old sweet corn will do, but I find that the cheaper stuff is usually a little bit better because you get like bigger chunks in. Right, we've got a small handful of corn, more than enough for like a few stringers, and we'll put it on some toilet roll because that helps to keep to get out the moisture. Now, ideally, you know, you should do this sort of 15 minutes before you cast out, although you can get away with it straight away as long as you dry it out, you know, reasonably well. I just put a little bit of pressure on there just to squeeze any excess moisture out of the sweet corn. As you can see, I've dried them off reasonably well, not too dry, like, you know, you don't want them to be like dried off for days before you use them or anything like that, but just to keep the freshness in them still, but just enough to take the moisture out so that you've got enough time to get the rods out and just to be able to cast it out. I have cast this, you know, an awful long way and caught fish on them. I'm certain, like, you know, as long as you dry them out reasonable, then that's enough to get them out there and enough to get fishing. They smell lovely as well. I've fed quite a few onto the stringer needle, bearing in mind that a few are probably going to fall off when you put them on, because you know, sometimes they'll split a little bit. But you could even put some on like on the side, and then even put some sort of straight through the middle, so you can have different shapes out there. You know, different way of putting them on. Sometimes, like, you know, they tend to stay on a little bit better if you go straight through the bottom and out the top. But I wouldn't go too mad. Usually, I'd have like sort of 6 grains each side, or something like 12, 14 grains or something. I mean, at extreme, if you've got extreme range, sometimes I've even put, like, you know, sort of just 2 grains on each side, so there's only four grains on there, which is still enough for a bite, but you can cast out just that little bit further when it's extreme range fishing. I mean, you can still cast these just about as far as you can chuck a single up bait, which is why, you know, I favour them as opposed to bag fishing. I'm not the best caster in the world, and sometimes when, you know, you can see the fish showing sort of 80, 90 yards, like, you know, you're struggling to reach it with a PVA bag, but yeah, you can still fish effectively with this and still get a presentation that's good enough for a bite. Where, you know, like at that sort of range, you tend to see a lot more single up baits. Where when you can put a little bit of food out there, it's enough to get an extra bite to what other people can, you know, can get. Like, pull off enough of this PVA stuff, because you don't want, you know, you don't want to be it too short and then end up too tight stacked together. I'll thread all that on. Like, you pull the first one down just to catch that, and then like grab the whole lot and just pull them on. Then spread them out, you know, so there's a gap in between most of them. Then what I tend to do, well, I'll trim off a little bit of that because there's too much. Then I'll fold it over so that I've got quite a bit of a chunk of it, and then hook that through like so that it's like that. Now that's the end that the sweet corn's gone on, so the chances are that that's going to be the first end to melt. So what I do then is like bring the other end up and again go through quite a little bit of the PVA, forming a loop. And that is enough to catch pretty much any carp.